Test, test. All right. I am Chair Irvin, and I will call this meeting to order at 6:34 p.m. Let's go ahead and do a quick roll call.
Commissioner Reynolds, Commissioner Etter,
Here.
Chair Irvine,
Here.
Commissioner Kendall.
Here.
You have a quorum. You may proceed.
Everyone's here today. Yay. Good job, everybody. All right. It looks like we are going to move into our work session, and it involves updates to the housing action plan. So we'll give it away to Nick.
Yeah. Couple of things real quick, just, business items. So this is a work session. So this is just discussion only. You cannot make any formal actions this evening. The purpose of this is to eventually, to give you background on the update to the housing action plan, such that when it comes to you in prime time in a regular meeting, you're more comfortable, more familiar with the document. Candidly, maybe reduce some of the questions and allow you to take public testimony should there be any, and deliberate on the matter a little easier. In 2023, the city received a $80,000 grant from DLCD. That grant funded the homelessness report and plan, and then also the update to the city's 2018 housing action plan. Me personally, I'll say, I can't believe it's been 5 years since we've adopted that housing action plan, but it's time to update it. And so that's really what we're doing now. Circumstances have changed. Think back 3-4 years ago, what the world was like, a little different than today. And so we have hired Eco Northwest to help us update this plan, complete some stakeholder outreach and feedback as we did with the original plan, and then identify some actions on how we can further address challenges related to housing production in our community. Again, so this is a work session this evening. I'll leave it up to Becky Hewitt and Scott Goodman from Eco Northwest to lead us through this, but my guess is if you have questions, turn on your microphone and ask the question. We're here to really roll up sleeves and make sure that we understand the underpinnings of the report. With that, Becky, did I leave anything out, or are you ready to proceed?
I think that's a great start. And yeah, maybe Scott and I can introduce ourselves, and then I'm gonna pass it to Scott to get us going on the presentation. So I'm Becky Hewitt. I am a project director at Eco Northwest. My work is largely focused on just this kind of thing, trying to help communities around Oregon pick the actions that are going to best help them advance their housing goals. And so I'm really excited to be working with Madras on this, because you guys are doing a lot for a small city, and it's really it's exciting to be able to work with you. I'll let Scott introduce himself, and then he's going to get us started with the presentation, and I'll jump back in a little bit. Over to you, Scott.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, all. My name is Scott Goodman. I've been with Eco Northwest for about 3 years now. I'm project managing on this work. I've got background largely in housing, also economic development, which is related to this. And then I also do work around education and social policy because I was a teacher before. I always like to mention that, and it's important to how I try and communicate information has largely been influenced by that. I will start us off with the presentation. Do we have the slides ready to go? All right.
Nick, are you okay? Yeah, you're getting it.
Cool. Let's hop on to the next slide.
I don't know
Mm,
if you can make it like so it is just one. It's like a not quite lined up. It's getting a little confusing with what's on what slide.
and it should be a different.
We can also share. I know you're set up to share on that end. If it works, we could share it from our screen if that would be easier.
We're working on it.
No worries.
Give you all a hot sec.
Let's just zoom out and. Yeah, and then just choose your arrows. Yeah, it works. Cool.
I think we can make that work.
And it should be a different slide. There should be a planning commission set of slides where the first informational one should say something about celebrate progress.
Yeah, it looks like this maybe jumped a. Oh, this was, sorry, I think you're in a different part of the packet. This was the slides that we shared as background from the financial feasibility analysis. I'm not sure if the slides were in the packet or if they, do you want us to share them from our side, Nick? Would that work?
Sure, we just put in the packet what you guys sent us, so there may be a mix up there.
Okay. Oh, yeah, sorry. I think I don't know if we included the, anyway, I'll, Scott, I can share from my end unless you want to unless you want to share it.
If you're good to do it, that would
Okay.
be great.
I'm gonna do this. 1 second. Get it into presenting mode. All right. Tell me if you all can see this.
I can see it.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. All right, go ahead, Scott.
So where I wanted to start off with this is making a point about what excellent work Madras has done already in advancing housing solutions. So in 2018, your housing action plan led to very real and measurable progress, progress that you can see reflected in your 2023 housing capacity analysis, which shows more housing being developed and that it's accessible to a variety of income levels. And then on that note, we work across the state and the region, and Madras stands out for the work that it's done. So much so that your city often gets cited as an example of a community that's taking action using the tools that are available to you to meet housing needs. And it's especially notable, as was mentioned already, for the size that Madras is. And two of the major highlights that we want to bring out to the forefront is the Housing Urban Renewal District, which has done a lot for supporting housing development where it wouldn't otherwise be occurring. And then also in the 2022 Development Code updates, which did a lot of work to improve clarity and efficiency for housing development. On the left, there's some other of the Housing Action Plan objectives that have either been completed or are ongoing. So looking at those zoning updates that have been done, streamlining with clear processes in a nice, user-friendly sort of checklist format, coordinating infrastructure improvements to support housing, expanding funding sources for affordable housing, and then strengthening collaboration with partners, and this being most notable recently through the homelessness action plan that you all have done work on. So kudos, that's wonderful. And as you all probably know, that these housing action plans are not static documents either. So housing needs have changed since this was originally done, and your policies need to adapt to reflect that. Some of the strategies from back in 2019 are no longer relevant or may need to change in how they're addressing and supporting your current housing needs. So the key question to carry forward with this is, what do you want to adjust? What do you want to keep? Some of the things you're going to want to keep in your back pocket so that you can pull them out later. The fortunate thing is you've already set yourself up with a really good framework and foundation that should make any additional actions that much easier. So why does this housing action plan, why does this work matter? So despite all of your work that you've done, there's housing affordability is still an issue. It is
Hey,
far
Scott.
from being, yes?
Yeah, looks like one of our commissioners has a question or concern. Commissioner Kendall, how can we help you?
I just noticed that a third person joined the meeting. Can we find out who that is?
That's-
There's a third head there.
It says iPad. I don't know, we can later go
Oh.
back into the Zoom file and figure out their email address, but that's what they identify themselves as. So, sorry about that, Scott.
All good. So sort of making the point that all this work is great. You did excellent things 5 years ago, and it's time to update. And then it's going to get updated again in another 5 years with new housing needs and things that we can only imagine right now. But the beauty of laying such a good foundation is that it makes it possible to do in the future. So one of the things to look at here, we'll go back on that previous slide, please, is that 40% of households in Madras are cost burden, meaning that they're paying 30% or more of their income on housing. That leaves little money left at the end of the day to pay for additional goods or makes you housing vulnerable to losing your current housing situation and makes it particularly difficult to sock away savings for purchasing a house down the road or needing to move houses if your living situation changes. So as these different housing conditions are changing in Madras, you're going to want to adjust your incentives and your policies to reflect where you need different housing requirements. One of the things that stands out about Madras' housing market is that it's relatively small compared to your neighboring cities that you have around you, and that it's also quite cost sensitive, which means that even slight increases in costs really impact residents quite significantly. And already costs are pretty low in Madras when you compare them to the rest of your region. So even though Madras is one of the more affordable communities in Central Oregon, there's some issues that you have to deal with about not having the same employment access or economic drivers. And that's going to be an important distinction when you're looking at what policies to consider. What might work in one city won't necessarily work in Madras, which is why you're refining these policies as you go along to fit whatever the current market realities are that we're facing. So next slide, please. So what do we do for this project? Well, you have all the details in your packet that provide additional statistics and our conversations in there. But what I want to highlight here for you is that there was a financial feasibility analysis that was done looking at your existing financial incentives and how they perform under current market conditions, where they're effective and where different adjustments are needed. We spent some time looking at your development code, which for the most part looks pretty good, but there are obviously some areas where you can do some tweaking that will add some refinement to better align with the type of housing that's needed given today's conditions. And again, those are in the packet that you've got that outlines exactly where in the code we found some issues that could be worth addressing. And then the most important part, I think, of this is speaking with the people that are doing the work in Madras. And so these are developers, property managers, site planners, housing advocates, affordable developers, market rate developers, and talking with them and saying, what is working? What allowed you to make some of these developments happen? And what were the things that were getting in the way of providing the housing that you were hoping to build for the city? And so with that, we were looking at, all right, what is within the city's control? What can you do? And what are the things that are outside of your control and are really controlled by larger market forces that you can't have as much control over, but you can plan for? So emphasizing the big picture about this is that it is not about starting over. It's really about refining the tools that you already have in place to meet the current market conditions, and continuing to be proactive about housing policy and trying to get ahead as much as possible of the affordability crisis, which, speaking as a relatively younger person myself, I feel that very strongly. And I know there's all sorts of people that are feeling those strains. They're very real. And so with that general overview, I will pass it over to Becky, who is going to help out with some of the key findings and nuance.
All right, thanks, Scott. Before I jump in, did anybody have Nick, it's pretty hard. You're very teeny tiny on my screen. So if anybody's raising a hand or has something they want to ask, I would love for you to just shout out and interrupt us. But all good to keep going?
Yes, I think if you could just note that it looks like the presentation that we have is missing those first couple slides that Scott just went over.
Okay.
So maybe after the meeting, we can have Nick match up and just get copies of the new information.
Okay. I suspect what happened is that the actual slides that we are presenting did not get included in your packet.
Okay.
So I think none of what you are about to see is in your packet. It all summarizes things that are in your packet, if that helps in terms of trying to sort of track what you have and don't have.
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry for the confusion there.
Oh, no worries. No, we just want to make sure that we are able to pay attention and that the information that you've summarized in your slides that we have access to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Well, we will make sure that that Nick has this most finalist version of this and that gets out to all of you following this meeting. Okay, so I'm going to take us through a couple of the more specific things that we learned from the market work that we did, from the stakeholder conversations, from code work, and then take you through where we see the opportunities for, as you refresh this housing action plan, where we think you might want to focus the actions. So on the market side, and this is sort of just unpacking a little bit of what Scott talked about at a high level. You've got a market that is comparatively affordable today relative to much of Central Oregon. And the smaller housing units, so things like apartments, townhouses, cottage housing, or just small detached homes, the market pricing or rents for those are hitting at levels that are kind of in the ballpark of affordable for middle income households, folks earning between about 80% and 120% of the area median income, which for a household of four, I was just checking this, is somewhere in the vicinity of like 65 to 90 something thousand dollars for a household of four as a total. So those housing types are kind of potentially affordable to those more middle income households, but they are also very challenging to develop, in part because the prices and rents are not that high. And as noted a little lower in this table, the costs, although the land costs are low in Madras compared to the rest of the region, the labor and materials costs are not that much lower. So it makes it hard to get the cost down enough to fit within what people are willing and able to spend on housing in this area. The other thing, just while I'm talking about cost factors to note, is the fact that the land costs are relatively low and that labor and materials are pretty comparable to other areas. That means that you're only going to get so much cost savings out of increasing density and reducing lot size. There's a little cost savings to be had there, but it's not as high as it would be if you were in, the Portland region or something, because the land costs are so much less. And then because the labor and materials are still relatively expensive, and it can be, sometimes you're having to bring in folks from other parts of the region that have to then drive an hour to come show up and work on the job site. That means that smaller units or offsite construction, manufactured housing, those maybe have more potential for cost savings than density. So that's something to keep in mind. Going back up to kind of the market preferences, one of the things that we heard several times is that one of the places where Madras is desirable to folks that might be considering where to move to is if they can get kind of a combination of, you know, the Madras location with the access to Central Oregon, the overall low cost of living, and then maybe they can get a little more elbow room, a little more space for their stuff than they could afford in a more expensive market. So one of the things that there's, you know, the developers kind of have a sense that, and the folks in the real estate industry feel like there's potential to build for that market if they could potentially offer that combination of like a little more space at a still pretty affordable price point. Challenge there, that larger lots and garages both add costs. I mentioned that lot size, you know, because the land costs are low, that's not a huge cost driver, but it does still add some cost. Garages are not like the most expensive thing, but they do add cost. And because you've got a pretty cost sensitive market, those little incremental cost increases add up. If you require them for everybody, if everyone has to have large lots and everyone has to have garages, then some people who might have been willing to have a smaller lot or not have a garage, now they can't afford the house at all. So that's kind of a challenge to navigate there. I'll also note, as Scott talked about, you know, with less proximity to employment centers, that means that, you know, that's part of the fact that sort of willingness to pay, ability to pay is a little bit lower than it is in some places, and that kind of keeps those market prices down a little bit. On the developer side, you've got a number of local developers that have been working in Madras that they appreciate what the city's been doing. You know, we heard some positives there that folks would continue to work with the city going forward. On the challenging side, the larger regional developers, they really rely on volume of home sales to make their business model work. They have to hit a certain volume to just cover their overhead costs and just make the whole thing worth doing. And Madras is a little bit too small of a market for them to be able to sell through enough units at a pace that makes it work for them. So we heard that it might not work for some of those larger regional developers, let alone a, you know, full-on production builder that you might get, you know, a more national scale builder. It might not work for them to come in and do smaller projects in Madras. And it's hard to do bigger projects because the market is only so deep. So that kind of keeps a limit on who is able to build here. I talked about the cost side, so I won't touch that again, but I will note that it also affects affordable housing. So there has been some recent income qualified affordable development in Madras by Housing Works. But what we heard from them was that was actually kind of a struggle. And the combination of the way that the rent limits work in Jefferson County, plus the construction costs that are, again, not really much lower than other places or potentially higher. And then the scale that works best for financing affordable housing is kind of too big for a small market like Madras. And so there's this sort of disconnect between the scale you can finance and the scale you want to build in a community like Madras that makes it, they had to kind of do a package deal with the 23 units that they built to like combine that with something else. So they got enough units to get the financing. That just makes everything more complicated. So those are some of the things we heard about kind of how your market is working, and some of those are mostly things that the city does not really control, but there are factors that influence what's going to work in your market and in your community. On the policy side, these are the things you do control. The general thing here, and I think Scott touched on this, you've kind of got the broad strokes right. You know, you've got the big ideas there. The zoning code, there's nothing like obviously ridiculous in the zoning code. You know, you've got financial incentives that developers said like, yeah, it made a difference. That was part of why I did this project. It made it work for me. So the broad strokes are there. And the devil is in the details on both of these things always. And there's room for tweaks and there's room for adjustments to kind of, you know, get the little quirks out of the zoning code so that it has better impact on the housing options you're looking for, and to dial in those incentives so they maybe are, you know, more calibrated to where the needs are. Your market's evolved a little bit, and so you could maybe ease back on incentives for some types of housing, and maybe that lets you, you know, reach a little bit more on incentives for other types of housing that are still struggling. I'm going to next go through where we see the opportunities in terms of where you would focus your actions. Before I do that, are there any questions on those kind of findings and context pieces?
Okay.
Okay, hearings.
Hi, sorry, Clifford Reynolds,
Oh, go ahead.
Commissioner. In your zoning code, what's promising, you write down recent amendments have helped remove barriers. I'm sorry, and I'm trying to read and listen and having a hard time, but what are those amendments?
I think they're referring to, in summary, the 2022
The 18,
Middle Housing Code Amendments
okay,
that the City Council and the Planning Commission had deep involvement in.
okay.
That's one of the big ones. Nick, I think we also heard about a couple of tweaks that y'all made in the master plan development stuff, kind of as some things were going through permitting, that I'm not sure what the timing of those amendments, but I think that was sort of the big package. And then I think there may have been a couple of other smaller things that we also heard about as addressing some kind of more nuanced barriers.
So can I get those after the meeting? Sorry. The 2022, I mean, just send me where they are in the statute or in the,
Yes, I can send you the adopting ordinance.
yeah, awesome, thanks.
Any other questions before we move on? Okay. All right, I'll keep going. All right, so got a couple of different buckets, if you will, of opportunities. There's 4 different slides here, 4 different kind of buckets of places where we think you might focus. First, what I'm going to talk about is different actions that would help expand housing options. So a couple of these are regulatory. You've got code requirements that apply to master plan development. There are housing mix and lot size requirements in there that we think you could make some adjustments to that might better support getting a range of different things out of your master plan developments. Again, as Scott said earlier, details on this are in the packet materials you do have. And we can talk about the details. You know, we're happy to take questions on those. I'm going to suggest before we get too into the weeds on those, maybe we'll get through the list of housing actions, because some of the code things show up in different buckets. And so then we can turn it over to you for question after that. Another opportunity to support housing options might be a couple of kind of strategic rezoning decisions where there are some areas that are zoned for higher density that might be a little bit more difficult to build due to slopes. There are some flatter areas might be easier to build with higher density. So looking at whether there's some, you know, a handful of the buildable vacant or partially vacant sites that could get rezoned. I mentioned your incentives. There's, I think, room to adjust the details of those so that they are better aligned with the housing types that you're trying to support. Marketing matters to developers, that was on the list previously. I think that's can potentially help expand housing options. I think trying to identify folks in the Central Oregon region who maybe build some other housing types and might be interested in working at a small scale. I think that might be a although the bigger regional builders may or may not be marketing, may or may not influence their decisions, there might be some smaller folks that are, innovating in Bend or other places that might potentially take an interest in Madras over time. And then continuing to pursue grant funds to support infrastructure that can then in turn support affordable housing or other higher density housing development. I know the city has done that recently, and so that's something that you can kind of continue to look for opportunities for over time. Supporting manufactured housing communities, another one. I mentioned that manufactured housing is potentially a good way to support affordability for Madras because of the kind of comparatively high construction costs relative to land costs. We heard some places where the city's code, maybe there's some tweaks you might want to make to the city's code. I would also note we heard some things that are really about state requirements that are problematic. In some cases, there was sort of maybe not an outright conflict, but some issues about the way the city and the state requirements work together that were challenging. So there's maybe some room for the city to make some adjustments there, even if you can't make changes to what's in state law. And then the financial incentives, it's not really clear how they work for manufactured housing right now, and the way that it has worked is maybe, we don't need to get too into the details on it, but just the way it worked for a recent development was kind of not optimal in terms of like the timing and then like the reduction, and there's just some tweaks you could make so that the incentives would provide a more comparable benefit to manufactured housing. And then there are places where, if you were able to help them access financing or make infrastructure improvements or things like that, that it could help the manufactured housing developers potentially either place units that could be affordable rentals or build additional manufactured housing communities. Home ownership. So looking at ways to support home ownership for low and moderate income households. Something we heard a fair amount about because you've got kind of more modest incomes in Madras, but one of the things we heard a lot about was just, it's tough for people to buy houses right now, and that kind of the limitation on who is able to access home ownership is also constraining housing production because it's limiting not the need for housing, but the way that need shows up in the market and how much of that market the developers can build for. So some things we heard, there's, opportunities to work with community land trusts or other nonprofits and help them expand production of affordable long-term home ownership. There's the community land trust operating in Bend. I think, they're starting to dip a toe into other parts of Central Oregon. So maybe over time they'd be willing to come to Madras as well. The city could also think about having some local down payment assistance fundings or other types of financial support for low and moderate income households that might help them be able to afford home ownership, that could expand the pool of buyers for kind of moderately priced homes. And then looking at, as you're adjusting the incentives and zoning, trying to make sure that those changes, one of the things they support is getting to affordable home ownership options. Last bucket here is around the maintenance of existing low-cost housing. Rental housing maintenance code might be something to think about over time. Those have to be done a little bit carefully so they don't actually exacerbate displacement risk issues for the renters there. But it can, if you if you pair it with some support and write the rules right, it can be helpful in giving folks a way to in making sure that the housing conditions are staying habitable and healthy for everybody. And then there are existing rehabilitation and weatherization funding sources available through the state that the city could potentially kind of help connect property owners to. And then the city could explore the possibility of using the HURD to offer grants or low interest loans to try to help folks make improvements to their property that might increase the property value in ways that would benefit the HURD. So that's a sort of flyover of where we see some potential opportunities in next phase of the HAP. From here, I just have next steps. I'm gonna maybe hold off on that and unshare so I can make you all a little bit bigger. And then, yeah, take any questions you have. And if there's any slides you want us to put back up, since I know you don't have them in front of you, let me know and we can share whatever you want to see again.
So I'm looking at, we had some slides in our packet that were not what you guys were showing, but I think the interesting part is the idea of matching up the amount of subsidy that's needed with that income level. So on one of the sheets I'm looking at, it's titled Incentives Needed for Affordability, and it says medium and large single family homes need more subsidy to be affordable. And then the next statement is cottage housing and single or small single family homes need less additional subsidy, which I find somewhat interesting, being that the construction costs for, like what you were saying, because our land value isn't really that different from a compared or a larger lot to a smaller lot per se. I guess I don't quite understand how less subsidy would be needed if the construction costs for kind of cottage housing and kind of smaller functions really aren't all that different.
That's a great thing to clarify. So the subsidy is needed to make them feasible. It's not needed to buy down the prices or rents. So like a large detached home, if you wanted to make a large detached home affordable to a middle income household, there's like a pretty big price gap between what the household can afford and what that unit would sell for on the market. A small detached home or cottage house, if you could get it built, that sale price would probably hit more in that affordable range already. So there's less subsidy needed on to buy down the cost to make it affordable. There's still subsidy needed to make it viable to build at that market price. Does that distinction make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, I know we haven't gone into the specifics, but, you know, we did revise our code to encourage cottage housing and cluster housing in single small family. So I'm guessing that now restructuring of the subsidies is what would make that supply actually show up.
I think it would certainly help. I mean, you're in a situation where, you know, it just generally, you know, I was just having this conversation with folks from California. It's like when you have high cost markets and you remove a regulatory barrier, the market will often kind of take care of things from there. Like you know, the market is there, you need to kind of get the zoning out of the way. In a low cost market, the zoning can still be a barrier, but removing the regulatory obstacles may be not enough to make things happen that haven't been happening. And so I think when you pair the code updates with some targeted financial support, that can often make the combination of those things, especially in a lower cost market, can bear more fruit than either of them individually.
That makes sense.
The way I think about it is, generally, we would hope that that would be the case. But still, there has to be a market for the product or a demand for it. And so, we have one development right now that's partially out of the ground and there's not a lot of product moving. And there's been a lot of discussion about why that is, with due respect to the developer. And part of that is high interest rates. So in a market where buyers are having trouble affording housing, if they can afford housing, they're being very selective in the housing that they buy. Another way to say that would be they're going to use their precious money and be really picky about what they're buying.
But you also have less qualified buyers in the market.
You also have that as well too. So that's the other side of it. So that's partly some of the challenges that I see moving forward with some of these newer product. It's not like you have, 5 cottage communities already in the city that you can point to and people can say, oh yeah, this is similar to that. I understand how it's going to work. There's already kind of an understanding of that. Cottage clusters, to some extent, our townhomes are kind of newer product in the market. Code changes make that easier to eliminate unnecessary process and cost. But ultimately, it comes down to market.
So I've been in Madras Clifford Reynolds, Commissioner. Do I have to say that word? This work session, right? Been here, Madras is like I don't know if you know much about people who develop golf courses, but usually the original developer doesn't make any money. The second person to buy it doesn't make any money. It's usually the third owner of the golf course that makes money. And Madras is I feel the same way, where the person who originally developed it usually doesn't make any money, is doing it because they've got some kind of grant, some kind of incentive there. And the second person who fills in those shoes because the first person went bankrupt or sold off or wasn't able to, they trick themselves into thinking that they can do it. And it's usually the third person that gets into that development is the one that's actually doing the developing. That's just my overview, or that's my what I've seen, and it's not to every case. It's just what I've seen in certain areas with certain developments, that they consistently change hands, and it takes about the third developer to make it a go. My question I got for Scott: are you familiar with the term Pareto efficiency? Okay, so I do feel that with these subsidies, we are taking from public services, okay, funding that they will need, and we're saying that it's creating a less cost approach for builders and buyers. But what ends up happening is these public services, like your fire, your police, they end up going out for bond and increasing property taxes, which in the long run is not a low cost savings to anybody. And so I don't feel like increasing subsidies in lieu of public services, cutting funding to public services or diverting funding to these services is really a sustainable approach, just due to the long-term impacts of increased property taxes that pretty much no matter what in the state of Oregon and Jefferson County are going to increase 3% plus your costs of these new bond measures that come out every year. So you can see anywhere between 3 and 10% increase in property tax, which is over time quite a bit of financial impact on somebody that maybe just barely qualified for a home loan. And is seeking out more public funding. So I don't know. What I do know is that taking funding from other public services is going to cause more cost in the long run for everyone else due to them seeking to put on the ballot another bond or another source of funding for these services. And then I saw that there is a focus on the supply side, and I know that's what your presentation is gonna, and I do see some focus on demand, on how to maybe qualify buyers, how to inform people of what type of housing, but just I'm looking through the packet, and median household income in Jefferson County is between, according to 2023 statistics, is between 68 and 73,000. Per capita is $32,299. Sorry, 68,000 to 73,000 per household income, and per capita is about 32,299. Your 1 to 2 bedroom rents, you say are 1,575. So let's say they're between 1,100 to 1,575. At the high end, you're looking at 58% of income just for rent. How do you transition somebody from the rental market to the home buying market when 58% of their income is going to be used as rent? How are they able to, traditional home loan, 5, 10, 20% in a traditional home loan, save up that amount in order to transition over to housing? Is there an idea, or how do you bridge that? Or is there any, am I just talking into the ether? Hello? Sorry.
So we had identified potential down payment assistance or other first-time home buyer support as a potential strategy the city could consider. That would take funding to do that. So that's something to think about, where that money would come from. And I think you're right that the ability to help folks qualify to buy a home and trying to help there be more homes at lower price points, those are those are both in this plan, but there's generally more the city can do on the supply side than on the interest rate side or things like that. Scott mentioned upfront economic development, that to the extent that folks are able to work their way into better paying jobs, things like that also obviously helps. But that would be more of an economic development strategy. And this is really focused on what the city can do with regards to housing, which is going to be primarily on the supply side and potentially trying to help with that kind of first-time home buyer assistance if the city can come up with a way to fund it.
How have you guys ever looked, or has there ever been anything looking into more of the transitional, the affordable part of the rental market in order to educate renters to save more? But basically what I'm getting at is a product like a trailer park where you can somewhat subsidize, but keep costs low. People are temporarily in there. You want, in your rental market, you want to see turnover. You want to see people moving up and out of rentals and into more permanent housing, and being able to save enough to seek out traditional loans in order to remove, mortgage insurance and other costs that are that inflate the monthly. Is trailer parks I didn't see that anywhere in the packet, but our trailer park's part of this type of transitional housing.
So Commissioner,
Manufactured homes, yes.
Yeah.
I'm talking about trailers, RVs.
Oh,
yeah, so RV parks in the city's code are considered commercial use. They're not considered residential.
Oh, okay.
In the recommendations are to address the city's manufactured dwelling park standards as a code amendment.
Yes.
I would also point out that this project is looking at the authority that the city has and how we may use that authority to address policy, regulations, process, and to the extent that we can, financial incentives to address housing. Neighbor Impact is our regional community development organization. They provide the Ready to Rent program, which is a federal housing urban development department program that readies renters for home ownership. That is also provided by our regional housing authority, Housing Works. They have the Ready to Rent program that matches up the individual development accounts, which a portion of their rent goes towards and is matched with state dollars. And they can accumulate funds, believe it or not, pretty quick, and allow them to use those funds for down payment for housing acquisition, home ownership, or even to start a business. So this is a long way of saying, Commissioner, I am not disagreeing with you, what you're saying at all. I'm only just saying that your questions are directed mostly at services are not under the auspice or the authority of the city. We have regional providers that do that at a much more cost-effective and I would say much more effective basis because they have trained professionals that help individuals stay in their homes if they've had them, if they have them, making sure that they are modestly maintained with energy efficiencies and plumbing, ADA access, things like that. And then they have programs for homeowner assistance, as well as I hadn't even scratched the surface at the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department, which has a down payment assistance program. So the idea behind that is the state is contributing to the down payment for first-time home buyers, qualified home buyers, to utilize the Housing and Urban Development Department, the HUD, First-Time Home Buyers Loan Program. It's a federally backed mortgage. That's now 5%. It was 10% when I first bought my home. So the state's now contributing portion of that. This isn't in the report because we don't have any control over it, right? We're just looking at what we control. And certainly there are resources well beyond the city of Madras that residents of all income levels can utilize, whether it be regional partners, as I've identified, state level, and even some of the federal resources as well.
okay. So my question was going to be, and maybe it's been addressed and I just am not catching it. When she mentioned that the city helped with policy, of course, making things easier, which we have been working on, but also the financial, where does the city lie in their ability? Because it didn't sound like from what you said that it sounds like it's in our partnership with others versus us, so our financial incentives is as a city, our main part is being able to either just give incentives to developers, but not really, as a city, be able to help the buyer. Our
Correct,
partners are the
correct.
ones that are there to help the buyers, not the city.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the monies doesn't come from the city. The city can
The
offer
city
the
does have
resources.
financial incentives
To the developers.
to the developers. Yep, we're using property
Okay, so
tax.
our
revenue.
financial contribution to try to bring more affordable housing is on the developer side versus on the buyer side. And our partners that we partner with are the ones that are there to help the,
Correct.
Okay.
That's a good summary.
so we're here to, the bottom line of this is what?
Well, we want to make sure you understand what's being recommended here and why. And ultimately, at a future planning commission meeting, we're going to ask for you to make a recommendation on the city council about this. Furthermore, I would say even beyond that, the city will eventually propose code amendments that are consistent with the recommendations in this report.
Okay,
And so we generally would like you to understand the
What-
direction we're going in these code amendments so that when you are presented a proposal and staff references the 2025 Housing Action Plan, you've generally got an understanding like, oh yeah, I remember we looked at that and there were some recommendations. Staff's going to help you remember what's in there, what this proposal is, how it's consistent with that plan, and then really start rolling up the sleeves and discussing the code amendments, right? So that's another component of it as well.
Is the HURD set to expire?
Yes, it's a 30-year district, so it'll expire in 2050.
Oh,
I haven't heard any
that's what he
recommend.
said, to 2050.
Are we gonna get, so far, we've gotten overview, not really recommendations.
Well, I think the slides that did show the recommendations do a very good job summarizing the actions in the report.
So am I correct in my assessments when I say that the HURD takes, basically, you're reallocating money from a different, or from another public service in order to create funding for the HURD?
That's not exactly true.
Okay, okay,
That's
So-
not factually correct.
that's not factually correct.
No,
Okay,
when
so,
when the district was created on January 1st, 2020,
okay,
we did not have any development to speak of in the district. So there's no diversion of taxes. The only way you get property taxes in an urban renewal district is when development occurs in that district.
okay.
And-
And then when development does occur, there is an increased need for fire, police, correct?
In terms of services,
In terms of services, there's more households, there's more,
I would
People
say
just-
generally, I don't agree with that completely,
okay,
but generally speaking, yes, there is.
okay,
There's national studies in terms of fire
yeah,
that, in terms of fire and EMS response, new development oftentimes doesn't burn and require a fire truck go to the home because of modern building codes.
hmm
That's widely held. Now, more people does equal more emergency response in terms of EMS and ambulances, things like that. That does create demand.
okay.
But I think where you're going with this is if we have development in the district, are we taking money from the other taxing districts?
Yes,
And my contention is no,
okay,
because if the Housing Urban Renewal District isn't making any incentives, you aren't partnering with developers to actually build new housing and create new property tax value and therefore revenue in the district. So we have actually,
chicken or the egg, right?
no, it's not. We have very clearly someone who's made over a $25 million investment in our community and has said, without the HURD, they are not making that investment. So the premise that someone who's made that investment in the community, if you didn't have the HURD, you'd still have it and you're taking money from all the other taxing district, in my mind is false because you wouldn't have the development. Therefore, you wouldn't have the property tax revenue and you certainly wouldn't have the quote impacts to the districts.
Okay, but I'm just saying, your point of view on that may be a little biased, right?
I would say
Due to
it's-
due to your proponent of the HURD.
I'm a proponent of the HURD because the council adopted a 2018 Housing Action Plan that identified significant barriers to housing, and one of those was costs.
So how
And looking at
far,
all the other revenue options for the city,
yes,
an urban renewal district and SDC reductions were the only two that we had direct authority to implement, and it would generate a meaningful amount of revenue to be meaningful to inspire new residential development in the city that we needed.
okay, and the emphasis was for new development, rental, low cost rental, housing? No,
No, it's
just
the
pure housing.
2018 Housing Action Plan is for all income levels, and then what you're seeing in the 2025 update is continued for a need for housing at all income levels.
When you say housing, we're talking permanent housing, single family homes?
Housing
or
of all types,
Housing of all types. Okay.
homeownership, rental, subsidized housing, the whole shoot and match.
Okay, so how far are we from implementing rent control as part of one of these?
There's been never a discussion about rent control.
But I mean, was that even on the
No,
foreseeable plane where like city is going to limit?
no.
No. Okay. Do you see that as a possibility?
No.
No.
There is vast amount of research that shows that rent control is not very effective and creates a lot of other problems to communities.
Mm-hmm.
What we see as a good opportunity moving forward is to partner with developers and as needed, require that they, in multifamily situations, guarantee rents at a certain price point
Rents.
for a certain amount of time.
Okay.
That's not rent control. That's a development agreement saying, in exchange for a grant from the city to buy down the cost of your housing, we would like your housing units to be rented at a certain price point for a certain number of years. That's all to be negotiated.
Okay.
That's very different than whole cloth rent control.
And it's the same thing for developers seeking out a grant per lot. They have to keep the housing price below or at a certain point in order to qualify for that grant funding?
Yes, but we generally speaking don't do a lot by lot grant.
Okay, so it's
The
a
reason
median.
is the paperwork associated with that is quite, it's quite a bit of work. So we work with the developer on, like a phase or two or an entire subdivision,
Okay.
right? Or an entire multifamily development.
Is there a percentage that would be required? And like, let's say it's a 100-unit subdivision, the first two phases would have to be X number of dollars in order to qualify?
Not right now, but that is something that the Matters Redevelopment Commission is reviewing right now.
Okay. And
And I think there's a pretty, almost consensus on the council that past incentives have only subsidized market rate housing, and they're not okay with that. They would like to see their incentives, get more for their incentives, and that would be, workforce housing or affordable housing. So I think that's more the direction that our council is going to go. But, I also will tell them you need all of it, and you just can't incentivize one type or one income level of housing, right?
yes,
You need all of it. And so
Yeah.
that's why I have serious reservations about just providing incentives for workforce housing.
yeah,
or
wouldn't that be
just for affordable.
discrimination?
No, it's not discrimination. No.
Not discriminatory at all?
It's not against a particular.
But it is for a particular. But anyways, I do see the need for the housing, but I mean, even these affordable sales price and the affordable monthly rents, based on what people make here, I don't see how to close that gap. And Eco Northwest, I mean, other than subsidies and other forms, what have been some of the most creative ways you've seen of people or buyers and builders closing that gap? other than subsidies?
Subsidies are often part of the picture. Uh, I think most of the ideas that we have seen be effective in other communities and that we think would be effective in Madras are in the list. But I would say that community land trusts are a really interesting model that's been getting a lot of attention recently. And Rooted Homes in Bend, as I said, they're sort of dipping their toe into other Central Oregon markets. So I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that there might be a way to partner with them over time. Maybe that's not in 2025. Maybe it takes a little bit longer than that, but that there might be an opportunity for the city to partner with them. That we're exploring, and some other communities we're working with ways to create incentives for developers to to partner with community land trusts in some way to, give them a couple of lots, or that kind of gets at the mixed income, what is the city getting for the incentives? Are there ways to say like, okay, in exchange for this, you're gonna, some few of your lots are gonna go to a community land trust, or you're gonna offer a community land trust an opportunity to, have sort of first dibs on some of the units or things like that. There's, some different ways we've seen communities kind of structure that type of partnership with community land trust. But I think that's something that because Rooted Homes has really been they've been doing really cool work in Bend, and they are potentially interested in expanding. I think that's a really interesting opportunity that the city can continue to kind of figure out what the right mechanism and vehicle for that looks like going forward. But that's something I would say is in the sort of emerging ideas, emerging promising practices category.
Wow. So developers are willing just to give up lots.
Not for nothing.
I know, yeah, but as an incentive for lower STCs or maybe whatever
And-
is negotiated. But
Yeah,
you-
and
you've seen developers give up
sometimes-
lots.
So one of the ways we've seen communities at least think about structuring this is, let's say housing mix requirements. If it's like you have to do a certain number of units that are not single detached houses, or you have to do maybe a smaller number of units that are, permanently affordable through a community land trust or something like that, where it might be like, if I just want to do the housing type I know how to build, and I just want to like build these detached homes over here, maybe it's easier for me to just be like, here, you get these couple lots, like maybe I sell them the land at a discount, whatever it is. But that's one version of it. And then the other thing that we've heard is less of a developer taking any, if there's no financial incentive to the developer, just basically the sort of right of first refusal on the finished units. That's the way that Rooted Homes works. That's less their model, but there's Proud Ground is another community land trust that they don't build homes themselves. Generally, they will help folks buy the home and bring it into their program that way. And so for them, one of the things they look for is just to be able to pair some kind of down payment assistance program with the opportunity to buy homes when they are going to be built at, like a relatively more attainable price point, so that they can put those two things together, have the opportunity to help someone buy it, and the resources to help buy that down to an affordable level. And then that allows them to bring homes into their program without, the developer is still just selling the unit for whatever they're selling the unit for. So they're not necessarily taking a financial hit. So that's sort of a range of different options that have been at least part of, conversations that are happening with community land trusts that we've been talking to in different communities across the state.
I would also say that the developers desire to either dedicate land to affordable housing or meet some other community's objective often changes over time. So, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, the market was completely different than it is now. And they were very easily, more likely to give up a lot for to give it to a affordable housing developer so that they could move on and develop their market rate housing or whatever. Especially for incentives from either the city or state or something like that to buy down their cost for big ticket infrastructure items. Now, developers are pivoting. There aren't too many houses that are selling. Now they're pivoting to, oh, well, there's still affordable housing money out there. I need to be going to the state and figuring out how to build affordable housing. Because long-term, it's still something that's of interest to them. They can still make a dollar, make a profit building affordable housing. That is possible with the state subsidies under the program. So now I see developers pivoting from the for-profit into the affordable because that's where the revenue is, and it buys down their cost and they can move projects forward, especially when they can't afford to finance these projects. Very, very expensive projects, 3-4 years ago were 70-80% loan to value. Now it's 50% loan to value. So they're putting much more cash into these projects, and yet all the infrastructure is still the same high expensive cost. Now they can go to the state and other places and nonprofits, develop funding, capital to build that housing, buy down their costs. It isn't the for-profit that they normally do, but it's a way to keep their business moving forward. So they're pivoting over time to buy down the cost of development, whether they're giving land or agreeing to build alternative housing types during times when there's a lot of housing being constructed and a lot of buyers in the market, and then times when there's not, they're moving to other arrangements.
How do we get them to work with us under those new pivoting circumstances?
Well, I think that's really what this plan's trying to do. And then the Madras Redevelopment Commission is really focused on right now is how do we use our precious city incentives from our Housing Urban Renewal District and make sure we're getting the housing that we need and want, right? So if you're gonna partner with the developer, give them grant funding, let's make sure we're getting the housing we want. And the housing we want, I think, is where we're starting to spend a lot of time defining what that is. Is it workforce? Is it affordable? Is there some room for market or something else? And so that's really what we, staff and the Madras Redevelopment Commission and the City Council are gonna be working on the next 2 to 3 months.
Is that what this is all about as well?
It's the guiding document for that.
Is it focused mainly on new builds? I mean, is there any repurposing or any, I mean, I don't know of any the only old building I knew of that was substantial was El Torito, but that's El Torito now. I mean, to convert, if you were to convert buildings into residential, is there any focus? It seems like everything's new build, new.
Yeah, there isn't a lot of
I mean, we just don't have a lot of.
repurposing. I mean, there's a few examples across the state. I'm sure there's maybe 10 to 15 by now, but
Yeah,
candidly, when I was in grad school in 2002 or 3, whatever that was, there was like maybe 5 examples, and most of them were converting old remnant schools
yeah, or
into housing, right?
and old motels into,
Yeah,
trans-
motels tend to be,
homeless.
but you're
Yeah.
not seeing a whole lot of city or state funding with those. The motels, in some cases, for shelters.
Yeah, they're mostly
Yeah,
for,
the Ochoco
People die.
Elementary in Prineville, that is actually a tax credit project. It was funded by OHCS. That is an exceedingly rare project.
okay.
It's an exceptional project, but not a lot of communities can put that together. It's a tough deal to do, but yes, I think the short answer is yes. They're focusing on new development because you get better bang for your buck on that. And it's harder to rehabilitate buildings to a new use. such as residential, going from like a commercial or residential or, some other use.
In the presentation, there was some talk about encouraging the manufactured home kind of area. I know that there is a development here in town that has been fairly slow to come online. Is that a problem with incentives for that, or is it just a problem with that particular development?
I think the short answer is it's mostly with the developer. And I want to give respect, but, I think, when you look at new manufactured dwelling park construction across the state, when that was constructed in 2000, I think they started in 22, that was one of two in the entire state that was under construction. There might be another 2 or 3 under construction. There just isn't a lot of new manufactured dwelling park that are created. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is a lot of cities, zoned them out. Their development codes just don't even identify it as a permitted use. And so like Bend, for example, somewhat similar but different problem is they allow it in their code, but the zone that allows it, there's no land available for it. So that's how a lot of cities kind of get around that. The other issue is production. And we're starting to see a lot of change in the industry on this. But, prior to 2020, I think there was 2, maybe 3 manufactured housing production companies in the state. Now I think there's 2 or 3 more. In fact, St. Vincent de Paul of Eugene Springfield is stood up their own manufactured dwelling park plant at a old sawmill in Eugene. It's utterly wonderful. I mean, taking these, 500,000 square foot buildings and making manufactured homes. So the problem has been, even if you built the park like we have in our community, you just couldn't get them.
Where's the park?
Our manufacturing.
Yeah.
Oh, it's off of 10th Street. So it's off of J Street on the south side of 10th Street. To the west of Strawberry Heights.
With the gates.
Yes,
That
Have
was
they-
manufactured homes?
will be.
Have they started putting in? No, you're right,
There is?
yeah,
Yeah.
the
I haven't been
production
over there for a
has,
while.
since,
There wasn't any.
since COVID and since the
Yeah.
fires
Yeah.
in Detroit,
Yeah.
getting, their build time used to be like
No.
6 weeks. Now it's
On the
like
other side
6
of the
to
street,
9
on the other
months
side, Jay.
Yeah.
to get one
is.
finished.
Yeah.
Because there aren't a lot of builders.
That's
The
correct.
So
the
is it
biggest one I
demand?
think is in Albany.
You know,
And then the final issue is lending. So it's, you cannot get a federally subsidized mortgage to purchase a manufactured dwelling and place it.
In a manufactured
Park.
Park?
Yeah.
Oh, you can on land.
You can on land, yes, you can. But
Yeah.
in a park setting where you don't own the land, you're just leasing it.
Oh, you don't own the land
Yeah,
in these
yeah.
parks? Why aren't they selling the land with the park?
Cause that's part of the,
'Cause that's not a park.
it's, yeah,
That's a
it's not
small
part,
subdivision.
that's part of the
Yeah.
business model of a park is they keep the land, they sell the
Right,
house.
yeah, yeah, we have a
Yeah.
few of those around
Lemons of
town,
Delight.
but not many.
Yeah, so
Smaller.
the Housing Action Plan identifies a need to really take a look at those codes. I'll be fairly transparent with you. When we changed those codes in 2020, it was created by the discussion in 2019 between the City Council and the Board of Commissioners regarding Tops Trailer Park. And
Tops just sold.
thank you, Chair. And I'll tell you, as I feel like I've said 3 or 4 times today, I have a professional ethical requirement to advocate for those who cannot advocate on their behalf. And part of my advocacy is making sure that if we're going to allow new manufactured dwelling park construction, that is no different than any other in terms of the basic amenities, basic fire life and safety and things like that. When you look at Tops Trailer Park, that isn't very much in question. I have a spreadsheet that shows over 40 spaces in that 50-plus space development that have code violations. And over a month ago, our code enforcement officer had to work with the owner to move out a resident whose home was filled with mold so bad that they couldn't live in there with their two children. And
Is that the one? at-
thankfully, the owner helped them with over $6,000 in moving costs. So when you look at our manufactured dwelling park standards, it does require every utility to be underground. And there's a reason for that, because most of the homes up at Tops Trailer Park this time of year have a tarp over them, over the roof. Well, how do you put a tarp on the roof? Well, you got to get a ladder up. Well, most of the extension, the services that go from the power pole to these homes are less than 6 feet in height. So if you're walking around those homes putting a tarp on it without any light during the wintertime, you're likely to get electrocuted.
When was?
It-
but
it-
that was
all
built
the
years ago.
sanitary sewer had to be
But
re,
that's a one-off.
no, it's not a
Okay,
one-off.
Come on, you can't make that the case study, right?
Oh, I understand that you own,
No.
I understand you own an RV park. They're not the same. What I'm articulating is why our code is the way it is today.
Yeah.
And that it needs to be changed, albeit because, one, the space requirements are a little large, and maybe we don't need to require garages.
Right.
Short of that, I have no problems with the code. There's some other tweaks.
No, the codes, if they're a home, you still have to make the safety. It doesn't matter whether it's a manufactured home, steel brick home, or a tent. You still have to have the safeties, but that one was built how many years
In
ago?
the 50s.
Yeah, but
And how old are these single wide mobile homes up there? I mean, they are like ancient.
Yeah.
I am amazed that a lot of them are still standing. They're
Yeah.
so old.
Yeah.
They
you
only
can-
last.
You can remodel them over and over again, and they will hold up.
Oh,
That-
come
that
on,
tin-
the
that tin will
investment
hold.
in that. It's
Up
just,
there, yeah.
that whole place is a
But-
whole different ballgame.
But I think that, when I see manufactured housing as something that we may want to incentivize, my internal reaction is related to seeing those types of parks that have been built without a code.
Yep.
And so I think that knowing that our standard is there
Oh,
in a
yeah.
way allows me to think about that as affordable housing.
Yeah.
Because I do think that if we can offer those types of homes to people who can afford it, they can be great places to be. And some people really want to live in those, whether it's in fancy places like Arizona or
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Palm
they,
I mean,
Springs.
Eugene has great ones.
they
n-
have beautiful ones in
Eugene,
Bend.
Eugene has, yeah, Bend, they
Bend
do.
has
They
a
have,
very
they
large.
have great ones, new homes. There's the park owners, they're there. They take the pressure off the city because of the rules that are instituted by the park. They go out, they do their own code enforcement. They do their own, maintenance and upkeep and keep people in line.
Due respect, Commissioner, we haven't experienced that here, maybe except for you. but-
I didn't mean to
If
lie. I
you'd
know.
like to go on
I
a
know you
code
haven't.
enforcement site visit, I'm unfortunately happy to take you on that and show
I
you
went up there.
the stark reality.
No, I've
It's
seen
not,
it.
it's not a laughing matter. And I do get my hackles up about it, because when we talk about families and transcending cycles of poverty in our community that we've long had, a child and a family needs a place to go home and eat and have their children be able to do their homework and sleep
But that's
warm
anywhere.
and
That,
safe.
that's not just manufactured homes. That can be any home that any.
It could be, but
Yeah,
we tend to have more
but-
problems in Tops Trailer Park and Green Spot.
Well, we have that other,
problems as in burning down.
Yes.
Okay.
well, that's
You're
because
not
they're
talking
so
like
old and they
EV
weren't
section.
put in under the proper codes. But like she says, if we were putting new ones, of course they're gonna fit the code of safety. My goodness,
Well,
you're not just gonna
Yeah.
pull them in like you do an RV trailer that you travel with. Oh, let's just pull it into the space,
Mm.
hook it up. No, and that's sort of how they did that one. Let's just pull them, but that was a long time ago. Unfortunately, no, they haven't been able to either remove it or how do you
Yeah.
fix something that's been,
So I know we're getting down in the weeds and, kind of beyond the kind of policy level we'd like to stay at, but I would just tell you that the case law around vested rights matters a whole heck of a lot. And if the city could,
Right.
vested rights mean if I have a legal right to use a piece of land or develop a piece of land, once I have a right that's vested or I've exercised that right, I can maintain that right. And what we see in these manufactured dwelling parks is that, we cannot whole cloth require them to make changes to their utilities. We cannot require them to make changes to the amenities inside that park.
So
The only
vet-
thing we can do is cite the home and make sure that it meets our basic requirements. And so oftentimes we are met with strict opposition from the owners and the managers because they do not want to do anything than the minimum. And that's why you see perpetuated low-quality housing in several of our manufactured dwelling parks, unfortunately, that our code enforcement and fire and EMS do.
You're saying they don't, I mean, most of those up there are not park-owned dwellings. Most of those up there are owned by individuals. I don't know if the individuals
Correct.
are residing, but then you're saying they don't want to. Is it come down to an affordability?
Well, they can't, they financially cannot.
Correct. So when you say they can't, it's not that they are openly defying you because of, they can't do it. They can't afford to do so. So even though this is the only entry into the housing market that they have, okay, that they can afford or that they feel that they can afford or they're willing to pay for, it's not that they can't, it's just that they can't afford it. They're not openly defying you to
No,
defy
correct.
you. They just can't afford it. I mean, some of them are attaching their porches to their buildings and that's open defiance, but yeah, other than that.
Respectfully, I would disagree with that assertion. We get met with opposition all the time from both the park owner and owners of the home who lease
Okay.
the space.
It is under new ownership, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Any additional questions? Maybe kind of a redirect and refresh would be, so we are going to bring this back to you for, in a regular meeting for you to consider approval. So with that being said, what are your questions, concerns, or otherwise that you would like staff and Eco Northwest to either answer or address when we come back?
Well, I guess for me, I feel like this presentation was a great overview, but in the meat of this paperwork that we have is quite a lot of detail about changes. And I feel like a work session that's specific to these type of changes would be appropriate because we've heard the high level. And I know that there are some limitations statutorily about what we can talk about. But I think that we learned tonight some vocabulary words and the framework. But looking at this handout here, there's very specific changes and ideas. And I feel like it would be helpful to go over those
I
in a
agree.
way, in a talking session before we consider
Okay.
any type of action.
So to be clear, you would like to spend more time discussing the recommended actions and the thoughts around why those are being recommended?
Yes, because I feel like this gave us a great framework to have
Yeah.
that next discussion.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a gap right now between voting on something and what we learned
Sure.
this evening.
That's good feedback. Thank you.
Very wise. Very wise.
I totally agree. That was
Okay.
very well stated. Thank you. Because I thought, what are we voting on?
Well, Commissioner Kendall, you don't get to vote anything on tonight, so
No,
you
I
get
don't
it.
mean that. I mean, when you, even
Yeah.
when we came back, I'm thinking, okay, what exactly are we voting on?
Yeah,
And so to go through what the changes are going to be,
yeah.
like, you said.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, well, we need to have one more work session.
yeah,
And then following that, assuming you're ready to swallow the spoonful of peas. Sorry, past childhood reference. And then you'll consider taking action on the matter.
Definitely. And I was getting at the handout here where it says current text and the potential is super helpful. So going over things like that, because I think that for us to make a recommendation, I do feel like we need to be a little bit in the detail to make this type of change. And I think some of the things that Cliff was getting at, in particular, if we can be clear about the incentives, if they are coming from what source are we looking at? Is this incentive coming from a city source? Is it coming from a grant source? Is it coming from, a state kind of fund? And even if that specific fund hasn't been identified, what is the idea behind it? Because I do think that Cliff is getting at something that's important to our taxpayers is, where are our dollars going and are we shuffling money from one pot to another at the cost of somebody else? So just being a little bit clear about where that incentive is coming from.
It's good feedback. We could, it's also pretty well laid out in the 2018 Housing Action Plan as well. Because we did consider almost every revenue source under the moon. So we can pull that back out, do a little refresh on that as to how we came to, 2023, and then dig into what we're suggesting now.
That would be good. We'd
yeah.
have a sense of comparison of what we already have in place.
Yep.
Refreshing our thinking.
Yep.
To how we can increase it.
Yeah. Okay, so we can do that very easily. I think we do need to coordinate with the Eco Northwest team. Becky, are you and or Scott available on the 19th for a work session?
19th of what month?
This month, March?
Oh, Nick, I was wondering, maybe we can follow up offline. I was thinking, we will be preparing like a full, like the housing action plan with like a more sort of detail and things like that. And what I was wondering is whether it would be appropriate to do that next work session with the draft of the actual housing action plan. This is sort of as you said, it's kind of a like summary preview of where we're going, check for like big concerns, areas where we need to make adjustments. But I'm wondering if it would be appropriate for that next work session to be with a draft of the housing action plan itself, which would mean a little bit further down the road. And if you want to talk about that offline and then get back to folks, we can do that.
Well, I don't know that my opinion matters so much as the planning commission. And so generally
Isn't
speaking, what was in the packet are kind of the foundational blocks for the plan, which
Okay.
would be the summary of the stakeholder and outreach, the financial analysis of housing, and then the code amendments. So
Is
the
that
question for the
what's in
planning
here?
commissioners is, if you've got those three kind of components at our next work session, can we discuss that such that at the following planning commission meeting, whenever that would be, when you look at the actual plan, you'd have good comfort with that? Would that be okay?
I think that actually sounds great because I think the housing action plan, again, is something that we would be voting on. And I feel like this would be a great bridge to cover what you just talked about.
yeah.
So maybe, I'm not sure if I don't know how you want to involve that, but I think that a lot of the information is available in this packet here. We just need to be able to kind of digest it with your guidance.
That's my kind of, I get that impression as well from the planning commission, that if you're comfortable with those three documents, then the plan is going to be much easier for you to digest and understand.
And two, you may be able to give feedback about what we learn or questions that we have for that plan
Sure.
as well, rather than having to make more changes or realize you're missing something.
Can we do that without them being at the meeting? I mean, they are definitely welcome to be at the meeting, but if they can't do it for the 19th, can we have this bridge discussion we're talking about just based on this information, or do you need them to present it because it's their package?
I could probably do a decent job. I mean, they are the experts. There's a
mean, it's
reason
up
we
to
did
you.
hire them. But so I would say, probably the one component I probably couldn't represent or carry the water on very well is the economic incentives, because I just wasn't involved in that much. So if there's going to be any detailed discussion, we really need them there for that.
Okay.
Okay. Becky, is it possible with the incentives and the subsidies to show which ones have like the most quantifiable effects as far as maybe the ones that the builders are, that, what am I trying to say? Yeah, the most benefit, most bang for the buck. Is it, can you put that in a list? Something easy to
Um,
read?
I guess I'm aware of two incentive programs, the HERD and the SDCs, both of which I think folks are using, both of which I think could be modified kind of around the edges in terms of how they apply to different types of housing, what the criteria, eligibility criteria are.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm answering or understanding your question. Are you thinking about in terms of other incentives the city is not currently using, or are you talking about the things the city has in place now?
The stuff that city has in place that's, I guess, gotten the most response or been the most, yeah, most
But you're
most
aware of
beneficial.
those.
Or is that for you? Is that,
I can do it, but, I'll
You
be
hired-
tongue in cheek a little bit. I am a little biased, Commissioner.
yeah.
You want the objective report from Eco Northwest on
Yeah.
that. But in all seriousness, yeah, we do have, we've got stakeholder feedback
Okay,
in this effort. And then, we've got, actual projects we can point to.
okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Nick, I want to just note, I guess, two things. One, I am confident in your ability to lead a conversation. I do think it might benefit us to hear the Planning Commission's discussion, probably more so than it might benefit them to hear from us, or at least as much. So that's something for us to just think about. And then I want to, I guess if possible, I'd love to just have a chance to connect with you offline that we can make sure we're still aligned with our scope and prioritize like where we are spending our time to support planning commission and council meetings. I don't know if it's possible for you to follow up with folks if you have enough clarity on sort of what the ask is, what the need is, and if we could maybe follow up following the meeting and just figure out how best Echo Northwest can support that. Would that be all right?
Yeah, I think we're fine with that and we can, if you guys are tight on budget, we've got authorizations for you guys to do additional work. So, I guess maybe I'm trying to kind of move forward in a somewhat reasonable manner, right? So, recognizing that the planning commission meets on the first and third Wednesday of the month, trying to figure if we need to meet on the 19th, if that's possible, or on, what is it, April 4th, April 2nd, thank you. Or
It's up
if we
to
need to call a
them.
special meeting. So I think,
It's up to them because
yes, right.
if we're mainly discussing what's in this package and not the overall plan, the packet's already here. Can that be done on the 19th?
If we're talking about March 19th, I would have to double check home front since it's evening hours, but I don't have any work conflicts with being able to join you all again virtually. And then, yeah, Nick, we can sort out how it fits into scope and
Just
budget.
Email us and let us know.
Yeah, I think Bethany's just reporting we've got 2 public hearings on the 19th.
Okay.
No, we don't want to
I
do that
mean,
then.
so, Becky, my sense is April 2nd is probably more the likely.
Okay. I think I can probably make that work as well.
But I will email you my availability for a call tomorrow, but I'll email you
Okay.
tonight with that.
Okay.
So.
And it sounds like what I'm hearing is that folks want a chance to dig into the specific recommendations using the same materials you already have. So not new materials, just a little bit more in-depth conversation maybe around the code pieces and some of the specific recommendations. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think too that some of it is that the information that you guys were presenting was different than what we had in front of us. So unfortunately, that does lead to more kind of a confusion. But those things happen. They do, especially when we're all running on timelines and things have to be submitted ahead of time. Yes, I'm a CPA, so my brain is already dead from doing too many tax returns today. So I'm sorry if my questions were because of
Oh,
that.
so if we were to have this work session after the 15th, it would have been better? All right.
Yes, but thank you very much for the presentation. And I think that all of us have some things to think about and to learn from. And I appreciate you all including us in this work session and a future work session because I know that we got through our last update after having several opportunities to read the information with the purchase of, or not purchase, but the
Homelessness report.
yes, and also the lot for the urban, not,
Oh, you mean your urban growth boundary?
yes, our urban growth boundary experience. So, and also not all of us have been here since 2018. So I think it's a good idea to kind of get it in the details there. So does anybody have any other options or can we go ahead and adjourn for the evening, please?
So we'll adjourn, you can adjourn, but then please look out for the email of the schedule for the next the meetings.
Yes, and I will be diligent to respond with that I am coming or not coming. But
Yeah.
both of those dates look fine.
All right.
Okay, all right. Again, thank you, Eco Northwest, for your presentation and all of our questions. And thank you to Nick and Bethany. And we'll adjourn this meeting at 8:15.
Thanks all for the thoughtful insight. Cheers.
Oh,
Take care.
peace.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.